Good afternoon. My name is Gabe Elias, and as chairman of the Associated Student Speakers Program, I'd like to welcome you to our second program of the fall quarter. Today we have with us Senator George McGovern, the first person to declare his candidacy for the presidency of the United States. After Senator McGovern's address, there will be a question and answer period. We have two mics set up on both sides of Jan's steps. If you have a question, I think we have two mics set up. Could you please go to one of the mics, if you can find them? It now gives me great pleasure to introduce the Democratic candidate for the presidency of the United States, Senator George McGovern.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman Gabe Elias and students and faculty at UCLA. First, let me thank the committee that gave me a second opportunity to come back to this university. I've had the privilege over the last 6 weeks of visiting campuses in most parts of the country, and everywhere I go, I find students, faculty, and young people across this country not only vitally concerned about the direction in which the nation is moving, but perhaps even more concerned that we move this country in a new and more hopeful direction, both in terms of our policies abroad and here at home. Now, occasionally one encounters, even on college campuses, a disturbing note. In Central Florida, about 3 weeks ago, there was a young man who handed out a mimeographed sheet to every person who came into the auditorium, in which that little flyer said, "We plead with the people of Central Florida to choose Jesus Christ, not George McGovern." Now, if there's anyone here who is under the illusion that that is the issue of 1971 and 72, I want to clear up that misconception right now. There's one thing we can be sure of. When you're challenging Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew, that is not synonymous with running against Jesus Christ. I noticed in the New York Times this morning an analysis of the absentee record of those of us who have aspirations for the presidency. I resolved that issue some months ago when I decided, as important as the work of an individual senator is, that no single member of that Senate can by himself fundamentally change the direction of our country, but that the President of the United States, under our system of government, can make that change. He can influence our course towards peace and justice. And I'm even more certain, after being across this nation for the past few months, that those of you here and millions of others like you who will have your first opportunity to vote in a presidential election in 1972 also have the capacity to change this country. And it's on that basis and with that concern in mind that I come here today. I would like to say for my part at the very beginning of this presidential effort that I pledge to every student in this audience, to every faculty member, and to every guest that for my part I'm going to give you a full measure of candid and frank and honest conviction on every issue that I address in this campaign. If it turns out, as I hope very much it will, that I win the nomination of my party and go on to become the President of the United States, I would make a second pledge to you, and I think this is the great lesson of the Pentagon Papers. I would never advocate a course for this country in private that I was ashamed to defend to the American public. Now, And I think it goes without saying that as the first member of the United States Senate to call for the withdrawal of American forces from Southeast Asia way back in September of 1963, I do not intend to be the kind of a leader who waits for a public consensus before he knows what he believes. I've been told by some commentators that I talk too much about the war, that I'm a single issue candidate, that economics is going to decide the outcome of the 1972 race. Now it goes without saying that this is not a one-issue country, that there is a broad range of questions that concern us, all the way from racism and poverty and pollution to the state of our economy, to the rights of women and minorities. All of those things are pressing issues. I've addressed them. I'll continue to do so. But if there is any one issue on which I would like to be known above all others, it's the record on which I've stood as a consistent champion of peace, and I think that's a pretty good place for a man in public life to take his stand. And incidentally, I would much rather be known, if I have to be known, as a one-issue candidate, than a no-issue candidate. Now, the truth is that we've reached the point in the life of our country where you can no longer separate what we're doing abroad from any hopes we might have for building a society of prosperity and dignity here at home. And the reverse of that is true. For example, there is no way to do what the President did a few days ago and discuss the issue of inflation on nationwide television for 15 or 20 minutes and never once mention the principal cause of that inflation, which has afflicted us now for 6 years, and that is the cost of the war in Indochina and the $80 billion Pentagon budget, which eats up almost 2/3 of the operating dollars of our federal budget. Almost every issue that one confronts, whether it's the neglect of our cities, whether it's the failure to provide adequate funding for the attack on pollution, whether it's the educational financing crisis and the failure of the government to address that most important of all public responsibilities, somewhere in the explanation of those problem areas is the enormous cost of this military sector of our budget. So I think the question we need to ask is not what is the most important area of concern among the domestic issues or the foreign policy issue. The key question is, what kind of a society are we going to become? How are we going to divide and apportion the enormous resources of the federal budget of the United States, which after all is the best index we have of the values that this nation regards as important? Are we, for example, going to put private corporate power ahead of the interests of rank-and-file people in this country? Are we going to put profit considerations ahead of the protection of the purity and safety of our air and water? Are we going to continue to put the body count ahead of a reverence for human life? I think those are the kind of issues around which this campaign is going to turn. And the question of how we finance the various programs that we talk about, education or health or environment, is an important one. Will we do it with a tax system that permits the oil billionaires to escape behind their tax shelters and has even invited the governor of California to do a little escaping himself? I held hearings just yesterday on the school lunch problems in this country, where we were told by government witnesses that while it might be desirable to feed every poor, hungry child in this country who attends a classroom where there is no school lunch program for such children, that we simply couldn't afford it within the confines of our existing budget. So this raises the question of values again, as to whether or not we're going to be the kind of a society that somehow has managed to find $30 billion to make certain that we were the first country to put a man on the moon, but yet cannot find the additional $2 billion that we need to see to it that no child cries himself to sleep hungry any night in this country. I think that these are the kind of concerns that the voters of this country are going to be addressing in the next 18 months. Let me just say that what I have been trying to get across as I've moved across the country is that we need to begin moving away from the economy of death that attributes some $80 billion to war and to the weapons of destruction, and begin dedicating this country to the proposition with which it began, which was a reverence for life and for personal dignity and personal liberty. I might illustrate in a semi-comical and semi-tragic way the extent to which this country has moved towards the mounting power of the military-industrial complex of which former President Eisenhower warned. My state is one of the least populous states in the Union. We have less than 700,000 people in that state. It's not a wealthy part of the country. It's not an area that one would ordinarily associate in any way with the power of the military-industrial system in this country. And yet, if that little state of South Dakota were to secede from the Union with its strategic air command base in the Black Hills and its 160 of the latest Minutemen missiles, if it became an independent country, it would be the third most powerful nuclear country in the world. Now, I think what this reminds us of is that while we're building the best missiles and installing the greatest engines of destruction, even in peaceful-looking pastoral states such as mine, that at the same time we have undermined other sources of national strength that contribute even more to the security of this country. Let me just remind you that when we first spelled out the priorities of this nation some 200 years ago, we didn't begin by describing the size of the weapons stockpile. We talked about things like forming a more perfect union. We talked about domestic tranquility. We talked about the general welfare. We talked about the pursuit of happiness. And those were the priorities of the new nation. And only last on the list came providing for the general defense. I think that was fourth or fifth in the scale of priorities. And one wonders if somewhere along the way in the history of our country we haven't shifted our values to the point, while clinging to the same ideals, that the gap between what we do and what we stand for is so enormous as to even cast doubt on whether our political system any longer serves the ideals to which it's dedicated. So I've just come back from a trip to Southeast Asia, which is the second visit I've made to that tragic area in the last 6 years. And what I discovered there again is the folly of trying to transport freedom and dignity to a developing country in a B-52. The folly of trying to teach democracy with napalm and with the massive kind of destruction that we've unleashed on those countries. Now our president has told us that all of this was for the purpose of giving the people of South Vietnam a free choice in a free election. Well, I don't have to comment on that other than to say that I think General Tu has carried the principle of one man, one vote too far. So we need to terminate that war, and it's not necessary to belabor that point before this audience, other than to say that once that is behind us, it only opens the way for the more difficult tasks that we've neglected these past 25 years here at home. It calls on us first to begin the reconciliation of our own nation, of black people, brown people, red people, with white people, men and women, the poor, the rich, the cities, the farms, all of those areas and divisions of our national life that now view each other with increasing hostility and suspicion. And it calls upon us especially to heal these wounds that have been opened up specifically by the war in Southeast Asia. I'm thinking, for example, of the young men that I talked to in the bases in South Vietnam last month. Frank Mankiewicz, incidentally, was with me on that trip, a former editor of the Daily Bruin, for whatever that commends him to. And in the course of our visit there, we talked to these young men about their attitudes towards the war, towards their government, towards their own problems. What we found was an army to a great extent demoralized, an army with thousands upon thousands of people in their early teens or late teens and early 20s, hopelessly addicted to heroin, many of them without any real faith in the institutions of our society. And I was impressed with the fact that more than in any previous war, this society is going to have to lean over backwards to provide a full measure of rehabilitation to those young men. Generous medical benefits, generous educational opportunities, guaranteed job opportunities and job training, and perhaps most of all, the kind of emotional and psychological support that a man needs who feels he's been involved in a dangerous venture that was a mistake from the beginning. Now, and then we have another group of young men that have to be reconciled with this country, and these are the ones who, on grounds of conscience, have been unable to participate in this war, and rather than to do so, have either chosen a term in jail or a period in foreign exile. And to those young men, I want to say that if I were President of the United States, my first action would be to bring an immediate end to the war. The second action would be to declare a general amnesty for all these young men. Now, so before taking your questions, I want to conclude on this declaration that I long with every fiber in my being to serve as a reconciling influence in our country, but to reconcile the country not by ignoring its divisions and its real problems, but by the reconciliation that comes from fundamental change too long postponed. We need to reaffirm our commitment to life, our commitment to personal liberty, our commitment to the pursuit of happiness. I make that commitment to you, and it's on that basis that I'm here this afternoon asking you to commit your time and your effort to this campaign for the presidency of the United States. Thank you very much.
We should have two mics on either side of Jan's steps. I can't seem to locate them. Oh, there they are. There's the one. First. Okay, could we take a question from here, please?
Okay. Senator McGovern, when you first spoke out against the Vietnam War in 1963, the United States had already been committed to that war for about 10 years. And at that time, your lone voice was what must be said too little and too late.
Yes.
Because we wound up escalating the war and many lives were lost.
Yes.
Granted, good intentions. You've declared yourself against the war. What are the new directions in terms of dollar expenditures here and there throughout the world, where we put our troops, where we put our nuclear missiles, down to the last penny, to the last helmet on the last soldier, that would be part of your administration?
Yes.
Where are the new directives in the State Department that would come under your administration?
Yes.
That would prevent Vietnams in the future?
Yes. Well, I think that's the most crucial question that can be asked about Vietnam today. The problem of ending the war, I think, is quite clear to any sensible person that doesn't have a hang-up on General II. But the question that I've just been asked as to how we prevent future Vietnam so that we really move American foreign policy and the American nation in a more hopeful and more peaceful direction is much harder to answer. Now, I would begin by saying that we ought to cut off any form of military assistance to the kind of dictatorships that we've been identified with in too many parts of the globe. I think, for example, that it diminishes the moral and political stature of the United States for the Vice President to be embarking on another celebrated mission, this time to pay respect to the government of Greece and to be on hand for the anniversary celebration in Iran, an expenditure that's going to cost that poverty-stricken populace tens of millions of dollars that could be better spent on improving conditions of life for the people who are there. It does not do anything to encourage my confidence that we've learned the lessons of Vietnam when our identification, both militarily and other ways, with the Greek military regime is further cemented by this highly visible visit of the Vice President of the United States. And I think the kind of military assistance programs we have operated in Pakistan and are now continuing in Brazil and elsewhere, that those do not serve the interest of either of those countries or of the United States. So I would like to see a scaling down all over the world of American military commitments, at least to the point where we become somewhat more selective in the kind of governments with which we identify American support, and especially military assistance. I think in Western Europe we ought to reduce by at least 50% the number of American troops that we have in NATO. This, incidentally, would do as much as anything other than ending the war in Indochina to redress the balance of payments. Now, beyond that, the United States ought not to be moving unilaterally in terms of settling the disputes of other countries. We ought, wherever possible, to move through the auspices of the international community, the United Nations, and other multilateral agencies. And that goes both for our peacekeeping activities and also for our international economic and technical assistance efforts. That's an all too brief answer, but it's the general direction in which I would like to see American policy move.
Yes, Senator McGovern, I was talking with someone recently about our policy which involves second strike capability. And this person was saying that he felt that this referred to second strike capability, that we would retaliate only after perhaps enemy missiles, whatever, had actually made contact on U.S. forces.
Yes.
And I would like to know, maybe you could clear this up for me, whether it is merely a pressing of the so-called button after we know that they're in the air, or is it until we have actually been hit?
Well, a second strike capability means the capacity to absorb an actual nuclear attack by an enemy power and still have sufficient retaliatory power to destroy the enemy or to substantially destroy it. It's a grisly concept, but you asked for a definition, and that's what it means.
Would we then retaliate once we have been hit, or would we retaliate even before, but we can tell that we're being hit, would you say?
Well, if you, this is something I can't answer. I can tell you that I'm very nervous about the talk about preemptive strikes and the open advocacy of some of our top military people, including General LeMay, that we use nuclear weapons even in a situation like Indochina. That was openly recommended. As a matter of fact, at the time the French were going under out there in 1954, Admiral Radford and others in the military advocated the use of nuclear weapons at that time. But I can only say for my part, if I were Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the United States, I cannot conceive of using nuclear weapons in any circumstance except where it was absolutely essential to the survival of this country. And even then, once the United States got into a nuclear exchange with another great nuclear power, it's an open question whether either country would have enough surviving to make it worth the effort.
Also, I'd like to know a little bit about your opinions on the Middle Eastern situation. Would you perhaps advocate aid to Israel or Egypt? Neither, both, why not?
Yes, I think the Middle East is a case where you do not have a military dictatorship with which we're identified. What you have in Israel is an independent democratic state that neither wants nor has requested American military forces. What they have requested is the right to make commercial purchases of jet aircraft in this country. I support that. I think it has been my view that in the absence of such control of the air, Israel would long ago have been annihilated. I believe that to be a fact. Now, that is not the answer to peace in the Middle East. It is only the answer to heading off the temptation on the part of Israel's neighbors to try to destroy her. And it opens the way for a stalemate that hopefully can lead to a negotiated settlement.
My name is Dennis Scarla. I'm the regional coordinator of the Los Angeles Student Mobilization Committee. We're building locally. Across the nation, I know you know about the 16 demonstrations that are going to be happening on November 6th demanding immediate withdrawal, which you said you were in favor
Yes.
of. There's going to be one of those regional demonstrations is going to be in Los Angeles, a march from MacArthur Park down Wilshire Boulevard to the City Hall steps where a rally will take place. That'll be on November 6th, which is Saturday. Now, in building for this, the SMC is organizing on several campuses in the LA area and also in the whole Southern California for coming to Los Angeles. It's a regional demonstration. Now, in organizing for this on the LACC campus, Los Angeles City College, the Student Mobilization Committee called a demonstration against having Marine recruiters on campus, which the students had voted not to have 2-to-1 in a referendum on campus this prior spring. However, the president of the university of the campus brought them on anyway. There was a demonstration against them, a peaceful legal demonstration, on Monday and Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, 2 students were arrested out of their classes on charges of malicious mischief, disturbing the peace, and resisting an officer. And I wanted just a point of information for people who don't know about it, because there's been a news blackout on it. They refuse to cover it in this area.
We have next question, please.
Well, since this is in the form of a statement rather than a question, let me just take this opportunity to say that I continue to deplore the kind of situation that developed at Kent State some time ago. I do not understand why the Attorney General has dropped any notion of a federal grand jury investigation of that situation. It's a strange set of values after 4 students were killed by the careless use of police power and military power that the federal government has not seen fit after a year and a half to convene a federal grand jury. And yet it took only a matter of hours after Daniel Ellsberg released the Pentagon Papers before the federal government convened a grand jury to investigate the New York Times. I don't understand that sense of justice at all. Now, I don't want to you didn't ask me to comment on the situation here, but I wouldn't get into a matter of how the university ought to handle this thing. That's something for them to decide. But I do deplore the overkill type of thing that was used at Kent State and at Jackson State, which I regard as really one of the great failures in the field of both police power and university management.
Right for students to organize on their campus against the war, and you know, would you call
Oh,
for
sure. I
dropping the
think
charges against you?
students have the right to organize and protest.
You spoke about the $30 million that was used to put the man on the moon.
Yeah,
I wanna know
30 billion.
30 billion, pardon me. I want to know what your feelings are about NASA, what you would do with NASA if you were president.
Well, I would continue NASA, and I would continue the space program, but I would continue it not on the basis of what prestige makers think will inflate our ego the greatest, but on the basis of what the scientific community believes to be the level that would ensure the best scientific benefits from the program. I've talked to a number of scientists who tell me that it really wasn't necessary in order to get maximum scientific benefit from this program to land human beings on the moon, and that we could have saved billions of dollars if instead of getting into a race with the Soviet Union, we had moved at a more scientific and business-like pace and had been satisfied with landing instruments on the moon that could have sent us as much as we got from the human beings who were there.
But Senator, the human beings and the use of human beings in space has led to vast discoveries in medicine and everything else that has come out of this sending a man to the moon. That's what, very length of time, 2 weeks or so, away from Earth. There is no chance of saving the men if something happens to them medically, except with what is put into the package to begin with. And isn't this medical knowledge, this knowledge that is saving lives now, of any importance?
I didn't know there'd been any medical knowledge.
Quite a lot has been learned by companies in setting up this man to the moon.
Well, I think we've
medically.
learned. I think we've learned how to take care of the medical needs of people on the moon, but
Senator,
let me just put it this way. There's no point getting into an argument of whether we've learned something from the moon program. Of course we have. It's a matter of priorities and values. What I'm saying is that by using instrumentation rather than the enormous cost involved in putting human beings up there, I think the scientific benefits would have been approximately the same. And with that billions of dollars in savings, it's just possible we might have learned a little bit more about the medical problems of people here on Earth, or maybe reduce malnutrition. Take one more after this.
Senator McGovern, my name is George Friend. I've been a member of the U.S. National Track and Field Team for the last 8 years. And what I have to ask you has to do with our Olympic and international amateur athletic program. As you may or may not know, the President of the United States is actually the leader of the sports program in this country. I can tell you with a great deal of candor and certainty that our boys will not be prepared to go to the 72 Olympic Games in Munich. Shine it on, but the truth is we are not prepared to compete against the communists because they put so much money into their program. One only has to look at the Cali Pan Am Games to see that Cuba beat us in our own national sport, baseball, basketball, and football. So what I'd like to ask you is this. If you were to be president, would you favor some form of federal subsidization to the international athletes and the program they are in? And if so, what form of subsidization would you think that might take?
Well, very frankly, it's a question I haven't examined until this moment. But can I answer it in a little larger context? I think that the United States doesn't do enough in subsidizing the arts in this country. I could not, in clear conscience, put subsidizing athletics above that. Now, it may be at some point after some of these other problems are brought up to a level where they are on the same financial footing that competitive athletics is in this country, that we could do more in the athletic field, because I do think a physical fitness program is important to the national interest. But we have symphonies that are in trouble all across this country. We have artists that are in trouble, musical groups, dramatic groups, almost every artistic group in this country, and the performing arts are in trouble financially. And I think that ought to have a higher priority than the allocation of federal funds to athletics. Take one more question? Okay. But
Senator McGovern, I might point out
We
that
have time just for one more question, so could we go over there, please?
Senator, I'd like to ask you a question,
take
please.
two more.
Senator said he'll take two more.
Let me just say I have to join Mayor Yorty in San Diego. And, I regret that he's not here today, but I guess I really shouldn't have expected to find him in Los Angeles.
Senator?
But there is a meeting of all the presidential candidates in San Diego later on today, and my airplane leaves about 2:30, so we'll take maybe two more questions, one here and then one over here.
I am Enrique Ramirez, and
What does that mean?
I've been asked by the president of the Chicano National Law Students Association to ask you this question. President Nixon recently appointed Senora Romano Banuelos to a high position in the Treasury Department, subject to the approval of the Senate. That pertains to you. Recently, her industry was raided by the Department of Immigration. It was found that up to 75 illegal immigrants were employed there. It is also a fact that Mrs. Banuelos has been consistently engaged in these illegal hiring practices. If it is proven that she was exploiting the people by paying them below the California minimum wage, would you vote for her confirmation?
Well, if those facts are true, or any kind of damaging evidence is turned up, I would vote against her confirmation. I want to reserve the right to check on the charges, because I need to satisfy myself that these things are true. But any kind of damaging information of that kind that can be documented would be enough to prompt me to vote against confirmation.
We have already documented that.
All right.
And,
Well, if you'd
we can ship
supply,
it to you.
Yeah, if you'd supply that to me,
Fine.
I'll appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
And one more question now.
In your opening remarks, you mentioned that as an individual in the Senate, you really didn't have the power to bring about the necessary change.
Yes.
This suggests to me that, well, what I'm trying to say is I want to know why you did not, on the Senate floor, discuss the Pentagon Papers even before the New York Times got a hold of it.
Well, because I felt the information could be better given to the American public the way it was given. Now, I would have, as you know, had to make a choice to violate the law and to subject myself to a prison sentence in order to do this. If there had been no other way to get this information to the American people, that would have been a different issue for me to confront. But what was debated was the question of whether it should be done in that fashion while these papers were still classified, or whether Dr. Ellsberg, having made the decision to turn them over for public distribution, it could be done better through a newspaper. Now, there was another consideration in my mind. I was an announced candidate for the presidency. I've been hammering away for our withdrawal from Vietnam for a good many years, and I made a judgment that if I were the one that released those papers, it would carry less weight with people who are inclined to be skeptical anyway about the political motives of a candidate for high office. The impact would be diminished somewhat as over against a source such as the New York Times or the Washington Post. And very frankly, I urged Dr. Ellsberg, if he were going to release the papers, and he knew at the time that if he did that, he might have to face jail. I urged him that the proper course to take was through one of the large metropolitan papers of this country, and I think the impact that release got through that route demonstrates the wisdom of the course that he followed and the course that I recommended.
Also, Senator McGovern, why did you not filibuster in the Senate to end the war?
Well, we did. We had a filibuster going all summer on the war, and did everything we could to stall off the passage of the draft with the filibuster. I happen to be the sponsor of the Hatfield-McGovern Amendment, sometimes known as the McGovern-Hatfield Amendment, and I don't think you can single me out as a senator who has not been diligent in trying to do what he could to end the war. But even when we brought that to a test vote, the highest number of votes we could get in the Senate was 42, and at no time did we ever get more than about a fourth of the House of Representatives to support such an amendment. So that's why I came to the conclusion that no matter how much one senator hollers, he's not really going to fundamentally change the direction of this country. But the president can do it if you and other people will help him, and that's why I'm here to ask for your help. Thank you very much.